Behold the Corax. We're going to make this mysterious weapon this week. Come join me.
Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. I am an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary items. The items that I make tend to be whimsical in nature, fantastical, echoing times of a forgotten yore, if you will. Items like weapons, novelties, structures, practical items that I use on my ranch here in Colorado. I am a self-taught craftsman. I am an amateur blacksmith, a novice woodworker. I've had no professional training and I own your most basic tools from Home Depot, along with some other items that I've cobbled together to create a shop that I use here to make my project. Each week I take you on a new build with me. I show you my process, I show you my perspective. I don't edit out any of my aha moments. I don't edit out any of my mistakes. This week I will begin to build something that is a bit of an oddity. I don't actually know if it exists. It's going to be a medieval fantastical weapon. To me, it comes across as a combination between the Japanese kama, a sickle, a ice axe, and then something called the corvus, which I suspect might be a recent term. There's a company out there called Zombie Tools which make the most awesome weapons, and they recreate different genres of weaponry. They have something called the Corvus. I can't link it because I don't have the authority to put up their picture, kind of the genesis of where this came to be. But this weapon is going to be a combination of several styles. It's going to be made in my style, which tends to be rustic, rough-hewn. I look forward to sharing with you this build. I would say, let's get to the shop and get started, but it's almost nighttime and extremely cold outside. So I'm gonna sit here by the fire and instead we'll start with the sketches and the drawings. Thanks for stopping by. Let's get started.
Alright, so right off the bat, this is going to be a very interesting build. I'm not certain where this weapon that I'm going to create actually sits in terms of historical reference. It is a combination between something that the Japanese had called a kama, which is essentially a sickle. Like a lot of weapons, especially weapons from the Asian countries, things were developed by farmers who were then conscribed to the military, and they would bring with them their implements and tools. And over time, things like nunchucks, things like certain types of spears, this kama, which was a farmer's sickle essentially, became a weapon, and it's something that you might see if you were a weapon aficionado today. But I find it interesting that there are also other weapons that are very similar to this. We mentioned a sickle, we mentioned a kama, there's also something called an ice axe, there's something called a glaive, and there is something called a corvus. I think corvus is much more modern of a term. It's much more idealized or stylized, if you will, of the weapons that we're going to look at. So essentially for what we're going to build here, it's going to be a glaive of sorts. I'm going to call it the Corax. Corvus, which is the modern stylized weapon that we've mentioned, that is Latin for crow, and I think it's after the look of a crow's beak, how it stoops down a little bit. So I'm going to call it a Corax because also in the Latin genus of a crow, certain types of crows and ravens are Corvus, Corax is, if you will. So this weapon's going to be called a Corax. I hope you followed me along with this. Now take note, I am drawing from the unlimited supply of down timber on my mountainside for the handle of this weapon. This is going to come back and haunt me, as you will see near the end here. But I like to take down dead wood. Dead wood tends to be extremely dense, extremely hard to penetrate. So it makes for good implements here and there. And it's something that I want to put to good use because I prefer doing it from scratch. So I actually made two handles here. But I will use one for the actual build. As I do on a lot of my builds, I use the bandsaw to get this piece of wood down to a square, essentially 4 equal sides, and then I'll bring it over to the sanders and make sure that the bumps and the ridges are out of it. And then I will end up taking the router to it, which you'll see here in a little bit. And as I often say, stay away from 45-degree angles on your router bits. They're very normal, they're very common, they're very perceptible. If you want something that looks a little different, a little unusual, use something like a 22.5 bit degree, I should say, or a 30 or 33 degree router bit. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the strap that goes around the handle that attaches to the axe head. I'm just not good enough to take a large piece of metal and drift it. And when the term drift in blacksmithing is when you take a large piece of metal and you basically punch a hole through it with what's called a drift. It's kind of like a chisel, a hot chisel going through hot metal. I'm just not good enough to do that. I've done it a few times and I just did not feel confident here. So I'm taking a strap, a very thick strap. It's probably 3/8 inches thick, and I'm going to form it so that it actually goes onto the handle that I want it to go onto. So one of the no-nos that I did here, I wrapped this strap around a very large chisel, and in doing so, you'll see that the tip of the chisel is red hot. In doing so, I softened that chisel. When you bring a piece of steel or iron up to red hot temperature and then allow it to cool, it actually softens the metal. So what I had to do with that chisel, because chisels are not meant to be soft whatsoever, they're meant to be extremely durable, extremely strong. I had to get that thing red off camera and go ahead and quench it in oil to get it very solid again. Here I am doing that 30-degree angle chamfers on these handles so that it gives it that, it narrows it down, it makes it much more holdable than just a particular square. But I also don't like straight ovals. Most hammer handles tend to be oval. They can slip in your hand. A few ridges in your hand goes a long way to keeping purchase on it. Of the many renditions that I had made of the head of this particular weapon, I descended on one and I decided just to go for it. I'm drawing it onto a really, really thick piece of steel here. It's more than 1/4 of an inch. It's probably about 3/8 of an inch. Very, very thick stuff, and I'm just cutting it straight out of that. I'm going to hammer it because I want to give it that hardened look, that weather-beaten look, but cutting it to shape first is really the process that I'm going to use. And to do that, to make some of these inlets, I'm going to have to drill it and then sort of bore out the what I might even call hooks in the profile of this. Now I'm heating it up because to give it that hammered look, that rustic look, it needs hammer blows, and it's going to get a lot of hammer blows here from different types of hammer, from different size hammer. I want it to look like it's been used in battle. I want it to look like it's deflected blows of other weapons. I want it to look like it's been caught in armor. I want it to look beaten and something that looks like it's seen its day in battle. And as I mentioned earlier, when you bring something that is iron or steel up to a hot temperature, a red hot temperature, and if you let it cool, it's going to be softened. So this is going to have to be quenched. I'm going to have to bring it up to a red hot temperature. And somehow I missed filming it. You're just going to have to trust that I did indeed quench it. And here it is after the quench, and I'm going to continue to profile it. And then, because I'm self-taught and I'm not very good, I'm going to do what the ancients did and use my MIG welder and weld the backstrap onto the blade and have a go at grinding the heck out of it after that. A lot of the time, what I see in my mind's eye when I begin a build is not too hard for me to capture and bring to form when I actually start the build. On this particular item, I had a real difficult time with that. What this ended up becoming was it ended up becoming what I would consider to be an orc weapon. If you follow J.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, an orc's weapon from those stories. This seemed to fit that build pretty well. Also, by the way, I think it's super cool, super fulfilling when you're making your own implements, weapons, tools, whatever it is, and you're making handles. Start to make your own wedges, your own wooden or steel wedges that you insert into the eye of the handle when you're mounting it to a blade of sorts. It's really fulfilling. It doesn't always work. You learn a lot about it, but I enjoy it. I keep little wedges around that I've made and use them for items just like this. Now I'm going to make some essentially strapping. I guess you could call it strapping. It's really going to be metallic reinforcement to the handle to go down the back of the handle when it meets the actual blade, and then on the front of the handle where I would actually hold this device. I wanted to have some metallic support so that this piece of wood wouldn't just splinter and crack. I learned a really neat trick, which is to take metal banding like this and to make ringlets out of it, and then softly but firmly hammer that around the wooden handle that you're working with, and it'll slowly enclose itself. And if you get your measurements right and you do it right, by the time that it encloses itself, it's really tight to the wooden handle, and then you can either weld it or rivet it or pin it or just leave it as is. I like that a lot. It adds a little aesthetic to the weapon at the same time. Of course, like the ancients do, I MIG welded it. I'm sure they would be really pleased with my choice. The only thing that I had that would match the length and thickness of rivet that I wanted to put through this was actual square head lag screws. So I used those. I made them into pyramid heads on one side, and then I struck them through, cut off the edge, and then just started to peen these over. I did not like the way this looked. I ended up redoing it at the last minute. But then I'm addressing more strapping here, cutting it into a semi-decorative design so that it doesn't just look like a piece of tube metal that I put to a wooden handle. And of course, my wonderful Home Depot deburring device that I just can't say enough good about. It makes sharp edges on sheet metal just seem smooth and perfect. So it's really important, even when it's cold, to keep close, tight grip of your work. You want to make sure that you're not going to drop any, crumbs, drop the hammer. Well, at least that's a one-off. You know, it's like I was saying, you want to make sure your work is tightly gripped, and when you put stuff down, you want to make sure that it goes to rest in a place that's safe and it doesn't fall. Crumbs, drop the tongs. Well, you know, that's only 2 times. Thankfully, I'm not gonna, oh man. And here's kind of a design flaw on my end. The lower part of the handle was actually almost square, so the bracket or the ringlet that I made was actually square, and the top one was round, so it wasn't something that I thought I did a very good job on. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a leather strap through this. I wanted to make something that is similar to a lanyard or tether, that when your hand slips in and grasps the handle, you have that leather strap around it that sort of holds fast. So I took this antler here. I'm going to make a little bit of a button, if you will, out of it, and hopefully be able to get it so that I can cinch it up a little bit when my hand is actually gripping the handle. And as I always say, I don't edit out my mistakes, and this particular piece of antler, the drill bit bit into it, swiveled it around in my hand, didn't feel very good, and I do have something to actually hold it down right there. I wasn't using it, so my fault. Every now and then I do something that I think is actually pretty smart, and I was trying to find a way that I could sharpen the blade of this and actually have the blade pointing directly towards me. So I put it in a clamp and then put that clamp in a vise. For some reason, I was really impressed with myself, really happy with this. I thought no one on the history of the earth has ever thought of that before, but it worked really well. And I'm using that electric file that I've used before. It actually is really, really good. It works quite well at getting things sharp in a larger macro format. And then I have the die grinder with the sanding wheel, which I'm just taking off some of the abrasions from the grinder to give it a little bit smoother work. And here we have painter's tape. I hate painter's tape. It is not any secret to those who live within earshot of me that painter's tape is my bane. It's an amazing product though, if you think about it, because it is completely useless, but whoever made it in such a way that they make you feel like you're the reason that you're having issues, that it's your fault. It's an amazing product, completely useless, and you feel like you're an idiot. You'll notice that I'm taking the very object that I'm about to blast with a hammer and putting it between my legs to hold it that way. That is because I'm a highly intelligent individual. What I'm actually trying to do is I'm trying to put in chips into the blade, gouges into the blade to make it look like it did hit a weapon. It was in combat, it did hit some armor. I ended up just cutting it in with the angle grinder that you're going to see here because that quench got that blade extremely hard. I couldn't get a chisel through it. I did end up putting a light coat of black, flat black paint on this, and then I hit that after I sanded it with these polyacrylic. I'd use a lot of polyacrylic when I go to do a light topical coating just to protect everything once it's all together. It came out okay, to be quite honest with you. I'm not super happy with how the look came out, but here it is, rough hewn, brutish, an orc's weapon. I think I need to go outside now and find something to sink this into. So outside I go. It is a very cold but beautiful day. Make sure I pet the animals, make sure the dogs are fighting the way that they should be. Anytime I walk out, they get excited and start to roughhouse. So I'm gonna look for a little tree over here and go ahead and give it a quick chop. What I was trying to do is actually sink the blade in so that I could take pictures of it. That didn't quite work, so I'm gonna give it another whack and let's see what happens when I get to sink this in a proper way. Well, I guess that's what happens. Well, I'm not gonna lie, that sucked. It's not unexpected though. The wood that I use off the mountainside, it's standing dead wood. It's dead wood that's been in piles for more than 12 years. And on top of that, it's most likely ponderosa pine or Doug fir, maybe lodgepole pine. Not the stuff that you would normally want to be building handles out of for weapons, for tools. I strive to build it out of materials that I can harvest myself, and in doing so, I run into this issue from time to time. The wood is not the strongest, it will break. This fractured right at the place where I put the rivet in. So, if here in Colorado we had oak trees, ash, hickory, I could probably make much stronger handles, but well, luckily for us, through the magic of video, it is remade. Handle and all, I did not put the lower part back on. I'm just gonna leave it like this, it seems well enough. And yes, this is one of the pieces of wood that I harvested off of my mountainside. So it probably too will crack, but I don't think I'll be swinging it too hard at anything at this point. Well, thank you for joining me for this build. This build did not turn out as I had planned it. Most of the time when I am trying to capture something that's in my mind's eye and I jot it down on paper or trace it or draw it, I can get pretty close on paper for what I want it to look like. And then once I cut it out of metal or forge it or craft it, I further refine whatever idea I had till it gets pretty close. This did not come out the way that I wanted it to in my mind's eye. To me, this looks brutish. This looks, I'll have to say, ugly. It looks roughshod. It just doesn't look the way that I wanted it to when I set out to do it. It looks like an orc's weapon. I kind of wanted to do that. That's sort of what I was going for, but well, I think you get my idea. This is all the more evident that when I went and hit the tree and sunk this into the tree and cracked the handle, my heart didn't break along with this handle. Other creations that I've made, had I broken it, I would have shed big crocodile tears. But on this one, I almost laughed. Yeah. This brings up a point. Creators, artists, I feel like we are prone to falling in love with our own creations, our own art. I feel like once we make something and we like the way it looks, its value to us goes beyond what its value to the rest of the world might actually be, potentially. There's a lot of times that people create something and I think by virtue of it being theirs, it's amazing. It has to be amazing. But also our heart, it's our baby. We created it, we're invested in it. So it sort of makes sense. But I think that can go too far too. I think that there are times when we as creators can look at our own creations and say, this did not turn out as I wanted it to, and I'm not pleased with it. I'll be quite honest with you, I kind of don't really like this that much. But the point that I really wanted to make is if we as artists tend to fall in love with our own creation and put a lot more energy and perceived value into our own creations, then we should also be able to man up or woman up. We should also be able to look at our items and be honest and say, this did not turn out the way I wanted it to. I'm not happy with it. It's not pleasing to me. It shouldn't necessarily be automatically pleasing to anybody else. But what's important is it goes both ways. We can love something we create, and at the same time, if something we create isn't spectacular in our mind, then be honest about it. Anyways, that's my diatribe. I hope that makes sense. Next week, I will be making not one, but two metallic metal flowers. One's going to be copper and steel, a combination of copper and steel, and the other one's just going to be straight steel. I hope that you join me for that. Until then, thank you for your support and God bless.